Folks, we try to keep it to 11 o'clock. Why don't we just go around the clock for some final words? Peter, you're sitting there in the middle. Any thoughts? If you could help our participants move forward, what do you think we're going to see in the next week, 10 days, 2 weeks?
Well, I think that all eyes are, the immediate future is, of course, the sanctions, which I think are coming out as we speak, and we need to see how severe they are. That will determine, that will have a significant impact, I think. But the ultimate sanction, the ultimate deterrent remains Ukraine's ability to defend itself. So I think in parallel to seeing sanctions imposed on Russia in the next, the coming hours, coming days, I think we also will be looking to see the West with its support for Ukraine, certainly in terms of arms, hopefully also financial support, not just kind words and moral support. I think they need very significant material support. That will determine because ultimately that's what deters Putin. I think ultimately he doesn't really care that much about sanctions. He doesn't really care about. He's more than happy to accept economic pain if he can achieve what he sees as a historic mission. This is a holy quest for him. This is a crusade, and he's not worried about the share price of Gazprom. He's not going to be deterred by that. So that's going to be key in the next few days. My ultimate overall forecast, I think, is quite grim, but I think Ukraine will come through. We're going to have dark days ahead, that's for sure. But ultimately, I remain an optimist. I think Ukraine has long since passed the point of no return in terms of the ultimate statehood test. And I think Putin is basically in cloud cuckoo land now with his speeches. He's what would have seemed menace, perhaps it's still menacing today, but what would have seemed perhaps more dreadful in the 1990s or early 2000s now just seems insane. Frankly, his rants seem less likely to be that of a man who's totally out of touch. So he's a very dangerous figure, but I think he's hopelessly out of touch with where Ukraine is today.
I agree with you, and there is a dichotomy. I think the FT brought this up between, is it Vladimir the Rational or is it Mad Vlad? I think we're seeing Mad Vlad right now.
I think it's real. I think it's real, but there are limits. He's not an all-powerful, absolute monarch. At the end of the day, I still do believe there's people in Russia who can, restrain him, and ultimately people have to carry out his orders. There may still come a point where people say, no, I won't do that. That's also a factor. He's not as secure as people think.
And I think participants, it's important to know that probably 1 million Russians have relatives in Ukraine. I know comparison may not be fair, but it's like Americans and Canadians. It's always been an open border. It's always been a lot of amity until this recent time. Myroslava, why don't you give us your 30 seconds of thoughts, then we'll go to Brian. What are you thinking looking ahead to bring people forward? What do you think we might see the next week or month or so?
Okay, well, in August last year, contemporary Ukraine as a sovereign state celebrated 30 years of independence. And that seems like a significant date, a nice round date. Of course, Ukrainian statehood has roots that go back centuries. You can start it in the 9th century, with the foundation of the medieval city-state of the Kyiv Rus. Now I believe in Russia, it's no longer called the Kievan Rus, it's called the ancient Russian state, Древнерусское государство, not Kievskaya Rus. So, we can go back, of course, to the Cossack state, when the hetmans had the power and a lot of military under their control. We can certainly go back to examples, historic examples from the 20th century. I mean, Jim mentioned the Ukrainian Republic, 1918. I think the most important takeaway is that Ukrainians find justification of their statehood in themselves in the present day. You can choose examples from history, recent and ancient, but the most important thing is that Ukrainians believe that they are Ukrainians in 2022 and part of an independent sovereign state. And we don't have to ask anyone permission to feel that way. And we are ready to fight for that. And culture has certainly played a part in this, but less and less so. Less and less do we see political affinity flowing out of cultural affinity. And I think it's paradoxical that Russians can happily consume Ukrainian cultural products and Ukrainians can happily consume Russian cultural products, whether recent or older, and still very much feel like, for Ukrainians, that they are a distinct nation, and for Russians to feel like, well, Ukrainians are quite welcome into the big Russian cultural family. So I think it's very important to keep culture and politics distinct in this case. Otherwise, it may lead to all sorts of confusion, and Vlad the Mad has been playing on that.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Myroslava. Very good points. And Brian, why don't we give you the last word? And in about 1 minute or so, where do you think things are going to evolve on the ground in Ukraine the next week or month?
I'd say this week is going to be tense. I believe it. I've probably been jaded for 22 years of living here, but I think it's going to get worse before it's going to get better. Today is the 8-year anniversary of the victory of Euromaidan, which is in and of itself an existential threat to Vladimir Putin and his reign. And so we don't know what's going to happen tonight on the borders. The second thing to keep in mind is tomorrow is the 23rd, which is Soviet Army Day, which is another wonderful date if you are a Russian military official. So I say all that to say this: do numbers matter? Well, debate it back and forth, but they matter for certain people in the circle of Vladimir Putin. So I would think those events alone, in addition to yesterday's events with the recognition of the LNR, DNR, tell me that the next 72 to 96 hours are going to be pretty rough. I think until we get President Biden and Putin in Paris face to face. So until that happens, I think unfortunately it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah, good. Listen, I want Myroslava, Peter, Brian, I want to thank you very much. I know it's super busy and pretty tense where you are, but it's been a real privilege for all of us to hear from you in Ukraine, inside Ukraine, about Ukraine today and what people are thinking and trying to spin it forward where we're going. And Patty, I leave you to say the closing words. I would possibly propose that we do this again in 2 or 3 weeks. It's really been very illuminating. And I'll say one final thing. There's a group of people pushing the idea that the Russian sphere of influence concept, that Ukraine is part of the Russian sphere of influence. Ambassador Matlock, Graham, Henry Kissinger, their ages are respectively something like 82, 86, and 98. And I have I don't cast shade on these 3 men. They were at the top of their game. They had the best information. They were at the top of their institutions 30 years ago. And what's happened this morning, our morning, your afternoon, is you have told us about Ukraine today, which has moved on and has moved forward and doesn't have a lot to do with Ukraine of 1991 and the chicken Kyiv speech Ukraine of 1991. So I'll leave with that. And Patty, once again, if our panelists are game, that maybe in 2 or 3 weeks we do this again. I think there's going to be unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of news between now and then. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Jim, for suggesting the panel and moderating. We'll be on touch about what happens next, and in both Ukraine and the OPC. But thank you, everyone.
Okay, good. Yeah, thanks again. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Stay safe. Bye.